Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. If there is trust and pride in our local politics, much of it is because of Nicole Gordon. She is the executive director of the Campaign Finance Board. So what's the Campaign Finance Board?
Campaign Finance Board. Well, it was established in 1988. At the time, there had been some terrible scandals in city government. Donald Maness, the Queensborough president, had committed suicide over a parking violation scandal that involved kickbacks for a company that was making little machines to
the
track
handheld traffic
handheld
tickets things.
Exactly.
Except they didn't work.
And it did reach into some city government officials. And the Koch administration, Mayor Koch, was intent on making a very bold statement to the public about how he was going to make sure that ethics in government was respected. And there was a broadside of reforms that were initiated by the Koch administration, and the City Council under Peter Vallone's leadership helped establish a bunch of different reforms, one of which was the Campaign Finance Program and our Campaign Finance Board.
The board itself came as a result of the charter revision in 1989.
Well, actually, it was established by the City Council in February of 1988, and the City Charter Commission at the time had been poised to do campaign finance reform. It was almost like a little bit of a
political
race.
Rivalry, right?
And the City Council passed the law, and then the City Charter, which went to the voters and was approved, established it as a charter agency and added the responsibility of giving out the voter guide.
Which is very important because it means that a mayor can't just
at
say,
will
go.
Disband it. Correct.
So you're there.
Yes.
The only thing they can do, though, is not fund you?
Well, actually, the charter protects the funding of the Campaign Finance Board. It's a very unusual provision, so it's a very unlikely scenario. It was really designed to be a fixture in city government.
So it was designed really to assure voters that they were going to be able to have a government that supposedly was free of influence.
Well, it's intended at the very least to diminish influence from moneyed sources.
So what does it do?
Well, first of all, it gives public matching funds to candidates who raise small contributions from New York City residents, as long as they abide by certain restrictions such as expenditure limits. Secondly, we do publish a voter guide that goes to every registered voter in New York City, now in 4 languages. And thirdly, we sponsor debates among the citywide candidates. That last reform was instituted after Dinkins and Giuliani did not debate when they were running for mayor, and there was quite a bit of public outrage that candidates who were getting public funds had not given the voters this opportunity.
So all of this, though, it's a voluntary program?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, it's unconstitutional to make it a mandatory program?
It's unconstitutional to mandate expenditure limits. A very recent reform in the program is that originally, when candidates voluntarily joined the program, they were agreeing not just to expenditure limits, but also to contribution limits and detailed public disclosure of their finances. Recently, the City Council expanded the disclosure requirements and the contribution limits to cover non-participants in the program. But it is unconstitutional to mandate expenditure limits. So the only way to get candidates to agree to expenditure limits that is legally binding is to give them public funds in return. And that's what this program does. It gives the candidate an opportunity to receive public funds, in return for which the candidate has to say, okay, I'm going to abide by your expenditure limits.
Is it unconstitutional to mandate the public funds have to be given to a candidate, or that a candidate has to accept public funds?
I don't know whether, I suppose one could theoretically just give out public funds without asking for anything in return. I suppose the government could fund some kind of candidate activities.
But that's not what I meant. I meant if you could you mandate that you have to give public funds, that a candidate has to take them?
Once you have the program, they have to, no, you can't do that. You can't
do that. And this is reflective, isn't it, on the national scene? I mean, when we talk about campaign finance, that there have been cases in the court.
Yes, absolutely. The biggest case that set the whole stage was Buckley against Vallejo, going back to the late 70s. And that was the case that established that the expenditure limits couldn't be mandated. And the court said, whether you accept it or not, that spending money was a form of free speech and couldn't be abridged, whereas making a contribution to a candidate is not a form of free speech, and it can be limited because of the appearance of corruption if the contributions are too large.
Do you think that we'll ever revisit that?
I think it's inevitable. Yeah, I do.
Because I think the financing has gotten so astronomically high.
It has. And also at the federal level, it's largely perceived as not having succeeded, either in controlling money or in giving enough in public funds to candidates to make it worth their while. There are a lot of defects in the federal program, and I think also the enforcement has been weak. And that's widely recognized. As you know, McCain-Feingold that was passed has tried to address some of the weaknesses, but there's a lot of work to be done at the federal level.
There's never a claim of weakness in New York City about the campaign finance.
Well, I'm delighted if that's true.
I think quite to the contrary. There are many complaints from candidates that it's unfair or that you penalize people for different things and everything. And it is a complicated system for people. I mean, here you are, here we are, it's not you, opening a system to encourage more candidacies and from less sophisticated people or people with less access to money. But really requiring very sophisticated accounting and
that's true, and it's a continuing struggle for us because on the one hand, I think we've worked very, very hard to provide a lot by way of candidate education, and I think things have probably improved a great deal since the time when you had to deal with it. But we have a special unit that trains candidates. We have candidate software that candidates use to enter the data, and it gives them reminders about certain requirements. We have a candidate handbook. We're now online in all kinds of sophisticated ways. So we do a lot to assist the candidates, but I don't want to ignore your point because I think it's important. I think it is not always as easy as people would like it to be, but here's the difficulty. We've always taken an aggressive enforcement position and really made the candidates account for the public funds in a very rigorous way. And I think that's an incredibly important thing because if we're really going to talk about integrity in government and we talk about making sure that candidates are not beholden, I think we also owe it to the taxpayers, and the taxpayers expect that if they're giving their taxpayer money to candidates, and not all taxpayers are thrilled with that idea in the first place, that the public has a right to know that those dollars were properly spent. And it's a sad thing to say, but it's really true. Where there is money, there will be people who range from sloppy to outright criminal, and we have seen some of those cases, and people have gone to jail. So, although I can understand that it's challenging for people, I think it's also part of our responsibility to the taxpayers.
I was musing about one of the things that you just talked about was that if the public is giving its public money, you want to be sure it's going to the right place. My money goes to candidates all over the city, but I only vote for the candidates in my district. So I haven't got a choice. And I was thinking about it the other day because I am dismayed at some of the candidates in some of the districts in the city. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't want my money to go to those people. But there's no way of counteracting that, I guess.
Well, that's an ideological issue, because if you really believe that this system, in the end, is going to help the process, you have to have blinders on with respect to the politics. And what we are hoping is that more and more qualified people will see that there's an opportunity, that they should not feel that the word politician is a dirty word. They should not feel that fundraising is the whole activity that they're engaged in. And one of the big pluses, I think, of the program, especially since the matching funds are really very generous, is that once you have done your homework in your district and raised a certain minimum amount of money on your own, you get quite a fair amount of money, enough certainly to run a competitive campaign, and you can start talking about the issues and leave the fundraising behind.
And you can max out. I mean, what you call max out by raising as much money as you're allowed to raise with those contributions.
Well,
if you do
you can raise as much as you want, but it doesn't do you much good after a certain point because you can't spend it.
When I was in the council, I think it was dollar for dollar match up to $1,000.
Right.
Now they've talked about a 4-to-1 match.
Correct.
Which sounds very extravagant, but is it more money? It is more money.
It ends up being more money, but it's matched on the first $250.
Instead of the first 1,000.
Right. And the reason for that is that when we analyzed the contributions people were getting in the old days, we saw that the $1,000 amount was really very heavily emphasized, and the program is really intended to emphasize smaller amounts, and it was thought that a more generous match for a smaller amount of money would serve that purpose better, so that somebody in a less affluent district who makes a $10 or $20 or $25 contribution can feel gee, that's $125, and that's a really meaningful thing. And on the other end,
no, well, anyway, you can't.
Well, and on the other end, there are very few people who can afford to give $1,000 to a candidate. So, although the contribution limits do allow someone to give more money, the match is only on the first $250.
Is that a recommendation from the board or from the council?
Well, the board actually recommended a 3-to-1 match. And ultimately, the council passed 4-to-1.
Because it looked to me as if it was almost a reaction to the fact that Bloomberg was the mayor. He didn't opt into the program. He was spending a lot of money, so we're going to give everybody else the opportunity.
Well, actually, the 4-to-1 match predates that discussion.
Oh, that's interesting.
What has changed since the last mayoral election is that the match that's given to people who are faced by a very high spending opponent has been increased. It used to be 5-to-1, and now you can get as much as 6-to-1 if you are faced by a high-spending opponent who is not in the program. So that
was passed by the council.
That was passed by the council, but that's since the last mayoral election.
And that really only really pertains in reality to Bloomberg.
Well,
to the mayor.
In theory, it could pertain in any circumstance where somebody spends a great deal.
I don't want to put you in an embarrassing position, but I could go on with a political interpretation of that. But it's all right. And is that unfair of me?
No, I think no. I think there are lots of levels. The Campaign Finance Board had made recommendations, and then it gets to the City Council, and of course, our board works very, very hard to try to do things objectively and fairly. And then it gets into the political mix. And the adoption of the 6-to-1. Goes back to a board recommendation of some years ago. So I don't think that...
it's an interesting kind of thing when you have to testify at the council. You're testifying in front of all the people that you've A, helped elect, and B, some of them feel harassed, right?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. It's a very difficult relationship. Well, I think the board makes very good recommendations. They don't all get adopted. And we do have some interesting conversations during the hearings. We had one just yesterday, and I think it's very difficult, and it's also understandable that that candidates who have a particular issue with the board have to separate themselves out from what their own campaign experienced on the one hand and what's good public policy. Right. And in fairness, also sometimes their own experience informs
is indicative of a general
issue, and it's fair for them to understand that. But it's a very hard line.
And some of them never do understand that. Right, but it's all right. I'm not putting you into that position. Are you? You're the only director that the board has had.
Right. Since 1988.
So it's really your baby in a way. Of course, you have a board.
Not only that, but we've had an incredibly distinguished board and incredibly distinguished board members. Of course, our current board chair, Fritz Schwartz, is well known in the city. He chaired the charter revision that expanded the city council to 51.
And he was corp counsel?
And he was corp counsel before that, and a very distinguished lawyer also in the private sector. Right. So one really couldn't ask for someone with more stature. Previous to him, the board chair for many, many years was Father Joseph O'Hare, who was the president of Fordham University and was a marvelous chair. And not to forget also, we've had many wonderful board members, some of whom are well known to the public, like Congressman Bill Green, Professor Robert McKay, Frank Macchiarolo long ago was briefly a board member, Sonia Sotomayor, who now sits on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. So we've had some whose names are known, at least in the legal community and also beyond, and then others whose names are not so well known, but who have served with such distinction and a tradition of nonpartisanship and independence that really it's just extraordinary, because without an independent, nonpartisan board, the rest doesn't happen.
This program is the leading program in the country.
We are thrilled that it's been recognized in that way, and it has been. And I think one of the primary reasons for that is the very aggressive enforcement program, because there are other jurisdictions that give matching funds to candidates or to parties. But I think what has distinguished the Campaign Finance Board is that acting independently, holding candidates to account, and the support of editorial boards and civic groups, I think we've been kept in the public eye in a positive way. The board does not seek to be part of the discussion during an election, but sometimes its actions draw it into that. So we're very, very pleased. And I didn't mean, by the way, not to say something about our staff, who are very dedicated and work extremely hard, and I'm very proud of.
There are some areas, though, that are very important, I think, for the credibility and reliability of the elected officials that aren't covered by the board. I mean, one of them, there are questions of ethics, of where your contributions come from. There are certain restrictions the board has about where contributions come from.
Right.
A corporation, you won't,
Correct.
a candidate can't take a corporate tax.
Correct.
You have to what? If it's a political action committee known as a PAC, you
it
have
has
to
to be registered with the board.
So to register it, does that mean that you do some investigative work about it?
They have to make some additional disclosure, and all of this information, by the way, is on our website. And one of the great things we've done,
website?
It's www.nyccfb, that's the initials of the New York City Campaign Finance Board, .info. And I really commend it to your viewers, because it has a searchable online database. I mean, you can put in anybody's name and find out what contributions have been made. And so it's a very versatile, and on the disclosure front, we are really truly at the cutting edge. So that's been a tremendous success. But you're right. I mean, we have certain restrictions in our law, but there are other restrictions that are not part of what we do.
The thing that I never could understand when I was in the council is soliciting the people who come before you for contributions. That seems to me to be an incredible conflict of interest and unethical. But there is no way that you can make a judgment about that.
No, none.
So who could? The council could pass legislation, but they're not going to do that.
Well,
since that's the source of their funding, right? Campaign funding.
Interestingly, one thing that has been under discussion
but the mayor did propose it.
There is a discussion going on about so-called doing business contributions. People who do business with the city on the one hand and make campaign contributions at the other. There are two thoughts about that. One is that at the very least it ought to be disclosed so that the public can make those connections. And secondly, that maybe they should also be restricted. For example, by not giving matching money for contributions from those individuals or individuals. Or by forbidding them altogether. And New Jersey recently, as you know, has instituted some changes restricting the ability of contractors to seek business if they make contributions. So one important development in that arena is that the city's Vendex system, which records contracts of over $100,000, has recently been put online. And people can now look at that system online. Now, it has serious limitations in one respect. It wasn't built as a disclosure mechanism. It's built as a tracking system for New York City. And so there are a lot of...
These are Vendexes for everybody who has a contract with the city.
Right.
Any agency in the city. It's a listing.
Well, mayoral agencies, anyway.
But you also can be excluded from Vendex. You can be rejected.
Well, Vendex is a way of not going back to knowing that a contractor did not perform in some way. So, as I say, it wasn't built for disclosure purpose, but the administration has taken a tremendous step by building this database, and they're going to do a lot more with it. Ultimately, it's going to be made compatible with our database, and then people will be able to make very direct connections, and the board will also be able to act, because the board does have under the charter certain additional authority to look into the subject of these kinds of contributions. But there are lots of ways of doing business with the city. Contracting is one. Getting land use approvals is, in some people's minds, an even bigger issue than $100,000 contracts. There are franchises and licenses. There are lobbyists. There are many, many categories. And this is an area in which what we are looking for first is the growth of databases that will allow people to, and allow the board to make comparisons. But it also has to be done fairly. You can't have systems, in which you pop out a name and it turns out it wasn't quite right, and things like that. So that's one whole area. And then the other area that I think you're also talking about in general, about the idea of lawmakers having contributions in
kind of an ethical standard.
Well, of course, in the United States, this is a very old practice that, in general, is not regulated in any way.
Not. Now, Mayor Bloomberg made a proposal, an ethics proposal, right?
Well, it was this doing business proposal.
Oh, it is.
And it's a proposal that the board has certain apparent authority to act on. Although the board's position has always been that legislation would be the far better way to control it and address it, because there are some limits on what the board can do. It can't reach. It may not be able to reach all non-participants. You know, there are some, but it's also a very tough area. I mean, just try to define what it means to do business with the city, and then you start to see all the places.
Well,
that
where
you
have we had this discussion about lobbyists who also run campaigns and represent clients and come together? Where has that been in Albany, or is that here too?
Well,
I don't know, but that's another area.
Yeah,
right?
well, Albany, has kind of got a historic lock almost
now,
on.
Let's just cover one thing though: the people running in the city still have to report to the state.
They do. They do. Although the level of detail and searchability and so forth is not at all the same.
Right.
But now, this new reform that I mentioned earlier, the one great thing about it is that the average citizen in New York City can go on our database and see non-participants and participants reporting the same, apples to apples. You can make those comparisons.
Right. It's but so the ethics part most likely will never happen.
Well, I think the doing business part is going to be building up.
So?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no question about that, because the disclosure alone that the administration is committed to will have the power.
Even with land use decisions and real estate developers.
Well, those are all issues that are more difficult because of how you make the definitions
now,
fit.
Let's go to the voter's guide.
Yeah.
That's to inform voters.
Right.
And the ultimate goal, I would assume, is to have them vote.
Yes.
Intelligently.
Right, right.
But we still have such low voter turnout in the city.
Right.
What can we do about it?
That's a really...
It must be a frustrating thing.
It is very frustrating, and I wish that I could do a political science study that showed that any one thing that is done by way of reform actually assists turnout, and I don't think that can be shown.
Yeah.
I think the voter guide is very useful, but we did some focus groups and some work on it, and we know that we can do a much better job, and we are going to have a very different look this fall. That when we're ready to announce it, we're going to go forward with that. But we're very confident we're going to have a much more attractive product that will be more appealing to more voters. But in theory, at least, and I hope in practice, the fact that the campaign finance program exists should attract more candidates, create more competition. The 2001 elections, which all seem so small, I guess, a little bit because of the fact that we had September 11th on primary day in New York City. But what got lost a little bit in that discussion is that we had the greatest amount of competition in the history of New York City, in large part due to term limits, but also due to the fact that candidates knew that they had an opportunity because of the matching fund.
Do you put out a voter's guide for the primary also?
Yes, we do, yeah.
And have you ever done any studies about what districts have the heaviest turnout? Is there any relationship to the number of candidates or anything like that?
No, I'm not aware of any studies that show that. But one other thing about the September 11th, the delayed primary, a lost story, is that there was actually very good turnout on the delayed primary date, which, of course, for a lot of people wouldn't have been the norm. And some people have commented to me that they believe that was motivated by the fact that there were so many city council races that were truly competitive, that it was a local...
A draw.
Yes, it was a local draw.
That's very good.
Which I hope is true.
Now, the debates will be primary as well as general.
Yes.
And the debates, though, are just citywide.
Those are just for citywide, yes.
Right. So that... hopefully those also generate some excitement.
Yes, I think they do. I think that it's something clearly that voters want. And there are lots of opportunities for the candidates to debate, but the thing about the debates that come under our jurisdiction is that the candidates have no say about the mechanics. They can't negotiate about the podium, they can't negotiate about the questions, they just have to show up and do it. Now, non-participants are not required, but they are invited to participate.
Did you think that you would be spending your life in campaign finance?
No, I really didn't. I kind of fell into this.
You're an attorney.
I am an attorney, and I was a litigator. I was in private practice for a while. I worked at the Corporation Counsel's office. I was at the Feerick Commission as counsel to John Feerick, the former dean of Fordham Law School. And then I took this position in 1988, and I have absolutely loved it, and wondered often whether after each election, it was a time to move on. But I really have had such a great opportunity here, and had such a great privilege to be a part of this reform.
I met you on the street with your daughter, who seemed to know more about politics than any of us. What's the impact on the kids at home?
I don't know. I think usually kids sort of reject what their parents are involved with one way or another.
She didn't seem to be doing that.
No, not at all. My husband is also very interested in politics, particularly in the last couple of presidential elections, and took time off from his law practice to travel to other states and do work for campaigns. And I think since he sometimes takes our kids with him, that has been an influence as well. But they obviously hear a lot of conversation. And now, with the free newspapers that are handed out on the subway every day.
Oh, yes.
Yes, they read those on the subway, so they keep
Do they make recommendations to you?
My younger daughter wants me to run for mayor.
Oh, that's good. That's a very good idea.
She wants to live in Gracie Mansion.
Oh, good. I had a kid who wanted to live in Gracie Mansion also. We'd move back in.
Yeah.
Do you expect this, I've totally now lost it, but anyway, do you expect that there will be a large turnout in this mayoral election? Do you have any way of predicting that?
I have no way of predicting that at all.
But the challenge is always to really hope that it will be and generate the interest to do it.
Yeah.
What is the total budget? How much money do you give out? That's what I wanted to ask you.
Well, the most we've ever given out was in 2001, and that was in the neighborhood of $42 million.
So that's a good expenditure.
Yeah, it is. It's quite a bit of money, although in comparison to the city budget, it's a very small amount.
Well, thank you, Nicole Gordon. We look forward to reading the voter guide.
Thank you.
To seeing the debates. Will we see the debates?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.